Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir.
I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth. And today's case is none other than A Walk Among the Tombstones from 2014, starring Liam Neeson, Dan Stevens, and David Harbour. The tagline for A Walk Amongst the Tombstones is, Private Investigator Matthew Scudder is hired by a drug kingpin to find out who kidnapped and murdered his wife. Based on a very famous book by a very famous crime writer, Lawrence Block.
Have you read it? Yes, Lawrence Block. Yes.
I've read several Lawrence Blocks, but ironically, not this one. So we'll have an interesting discussion about this film, I think.
Yes. So I've read the book, and I love this book. I think the book A Walk Among Tombstones is it was absolutely fantastic. It's one of those books that, you know, sometimes you get one and you sort of take your time with it for whatever reason. Like, it's good, but you're not like racing through it. This was one of those books I didn't want to put it down.
Yeah.
It was pacey and action packed and scary and really clever at times. There's stuff in the book that's not in the film that I thought was missing. I felt like, oh, I wish that was in this, because that was such a cool scenario and scene and how they worked something out, which I'll mention a bit later. But this was A Walk Among the Tombstones, the book from 1992, is a fantastic gripping, hard-boiled novel. Love it.
Well, I mean, we could say that about Block's entire run, I think, of Scudder books, certainly from the ones I've read. And this is something like, is it the 10th or something in the series? This
something
book.
Like that.
So, I mean, you know, he's showing no signs of losing his grip 10 books in. If anything, he's just getting into gear, you know. And it's and Scudder's a great character. Scudder's got a lot of interesting facets about himself that we'll perhaps touch on as we discuss the film.
Yes. Yeah.
But a question I've got for you to kick off really is your mental image of Matt Scudder Liam Neeson?
Ooh. We'll get there because I actually have a lot to say about that. But I think there's maybe other things that we should hit on first, because I have a lot to talk. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to Neeson and this role, and in general his habit of playing similar roles, because he's also taken on Marlowe recently, which not seen. I've not seen that film yet. I have dreading the day.
I'm gonna make you watch it so we can do an episode on it.
Yes, but in short, to answer the question in short, no.
Yeah, I asked the question because I think it's interesting when you get an actor cast as a character that you've known for a long time in your own head. I mean, a very obvious example for me is Sherlock Holmes, and you know, sort of John Rebus and people like Poirot and all that. When you first see the actors embody them, you think that's not what I think so and so looks like. You know, great example is Jack Reacher and Tom Cruise.
Yes,
and then so once you've got over that, what I've then find interesting is, well, is this in my view miscast actor going to do something interesting with the role? And if they do, fair enough. If they don't, then it just brings it home even further that they were the wrong person for the role. You know, Robert Downey Jr. and Sherlock Holmes is a prime example for me. But let's not get into that.
No, because I like him in that role. But that's a conversation for another day. Another day. The making of this film is interesting. So it had a budget of $28 million, which is pretty good. And it grossed $62.1 million worldwide, which is okay, I suppose. I guess if you double the budget for marketing purposes, which then, you know, puts it, you know, closer to the 60s or into the 60s, like, is it really making that much money? But I have no recollection of this movie coming out. It released September 19th, 2014. I have no memory of it. I don't know if it was marketed very well in the UK because I was living here at the time by that time, but like this did not register for me anywhere.
No, I had no knowledge of this film at all until I saw it purely by chance on a sort of recommendation on Sky. We think you might like this,
right?
And I thought, oh, it's a Matt Scudder fair enough. I'll have a look at that because I'd read some of the earlier books, and it came with a free DVD. If you bought it on Sky, it came with a free DVD, which is well,
That's interesting. That to me reeks of like we have a bunch of stock that no one is buying.
Nobody wants. Yeah, nobody wants.
Please buy this. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. We've not been able to shift this. It's like the sort of Del Boy Trotter version of getting DVDs. And that was the first time I saw it. That must have been, I don't know, 4 years ago, perhaps 3 or 4 years ago. And I've not watched it since until we decided to do it for this episode. So it was a bit like coming to it fresh because I didn't remember anything about it.
Yeah.
And to be quite honest, the next day after I watched it for this episode, I thought, do I need to watch that again?
Yes.
2 hours that it's on, it held my interest for the 2 hours it's on, but 2 hours after I'd watched it, I couldn't remember very much about it at all. And that's a real problem for me.
Yeah. I'll be honest, that 2 hours that it was on did not hold my interest.
Well.
I struggled with this film immensely. But before we get into that, let's chat about the people who made the movie. Because this is a frustrating film in that the writer-director is not he's someone who's well accomplished in Hollywood as a writer, as a director. So Scott Frank directed the movie, and as it happened, was then able to also, he wrote the screenplay. He worked with Lawrence Block for many years. Apparently he contacted Block sometime after the initial publication. So back in like 1992, 1993 period, he contacted Block, wanted to basically adapt this book. And this book has been in sort of adaptation limbo for decades and decades and decades.
Yeah.
And which was interesting to me because, okay, well, that's interesting because these guys are working together, and this, Scott Frank has intimate knowledge of who Scudder is going to, who he is as a character, and, intimate knowledge of this book. Like so knowing that and then seeing what is produced on screen is a little bit hard to compute. But Frank has a lot of good credits because he's won 2 Academy Awards for Best Adapted Screenplay. One of them is Out of Sight from 1998. The other is Logan from 2017. The Logan, the final, what was meant to be the final Wolverine movie, which is a noir as hell film. That to me is a movie that really works. It's interesting that he is involved with that screenplay, but then also is involved with this screenplay, and it just I don't know what's not working, but I mean, other things that he's worked on that are notable. He directed The Queen's Gambit, which is visually fantastic looking show.
Yeah,
falls apart towards the end, but fantastically looking show. Yeah. And his scripts include Dead Again, Malice, Heaven's Prisoners, and Get Shorty. So
Get Shorty, Minority Report, I think he did as well.
He also did some work on Minority Report. So he's worked in and on neo-noir films for decades. Yeah. So he's got the chops to do it. So you kind of see why, Scott Frank, this is his credits. He's done a lot of good stuff. Yeah, he seems like he would be a good fit for, A Walk Among the Tombstones, but I don't know what it is.
I don't know what it is either. There's something not right. I don't know if it's we talk a lot on this channel, don't we, about studio interference. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if there was a lot of pressure to do something that didn't accord with his original vision. I don't know. Don't know what it is, but something isn't. It's off key. It's like playing his career is like where this is in his career is like playing a piano sonata and then getting the wrong, pressing a flat instead of a natural. It's just a misstep somehow. Which sometimes you can tell. You understand why there's a misstep. Sometimes it's studio interference, bad script, bad star, whatever it is. But there's nothing that definite in this that explains why it has gone so wrong, in my view. Although I don't think it's gone as wrong as much as you do, which we'll come on to. But It,
I'm here to convert you.
all right, okay. It is. I mean, like I say, it held my interest, but only as a maybe this is the problem. It only held my interest as a sort of cheap action flick or a cheap thriller.
Yes.
It didn't hold my interest as anything else. There was no depth to it. There's no texture to it. It's Liam Neeson doing what he's now become famous for doing, but doing it in a much more brooding way. And some will say with perhaps more character development than he had in Taken, but not that much more. You know, when you've got to bring Scudder to the screen, it takes more than just a few AA meetings being shown, is what I would say. And that's what they replace character depth with, just a couple of AA meetings, and a really cheesy bit of an AA meeting in the climax. It's frustrating. You use the word frustrating, and it is frustrating because the people concerned can do better than they do, and should have done better than they did. You know, I mean, Danny DeVito produced it as well. He's one of the producers on it. And you sort of think that he might have a bit more, you know, sort of oomph about him to make this better than it turned out to be.
I would like to know how involved Danny DeVito was. I get the impression he might not have been that involved, because I don't know if you watched any of the behind the scenes stuff on the DVD.
No.
So I decided to give them a crack. There's only 2 things, and they're very short. But the producers that they have on there, all the producers except Danny DeVito and maybe one other. I'm pretty sure the other 4 are on there. So I think Michael Sandberg is on there. I'm pretty sure. I know Stacey Sher is definitely there. Brian Oliver, I think, is there, and Tobin Armburst is definitely there. But DeVito is not there on the special features. And the thing that kind of struck me as I was watching them is, if you've ever seen any of the post Disney Star Wars behind the scenes, they speak of the creating of the film in a very, like, almost religious way. It's all very like, you know, this is such a magical spiritual journey of making this movie. And I was getting that impression with these features. There was nothing about like, well, this took a really long time, this was really hard to do. It was all very much like, this was just like the stars were aligned, and, you know, Liam Neeson was just perfect. That. Yeah,
I can't bear that, because that's not actually saying anything, is it? That's not. No, that's just words that don't have any meaning. It's just word salad, you know.
Yes, but they do mention things. So you mentioned this thing about, you know, Scudder going to some AA meetings, and that's a big part of his life. And it's in all of the books. You know, he's very dedicated to his AA meetings, and it's him not being the drama doesn't come from necessarily him being a recovering alcoholic. His sort of life is wrapped up in going to these meetings, but you don't really get that sense in the film. Yet one of the producers in the behind the scenes says that, you know, you really get a sense that, you know, he plans his days around the AA meetings. And I'm like, you don't get that sense in the film at all.
I get more of a sense that he plans his days around trips to that diner where he's having scrambled eggs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he's in there more often than, and he's much more at home there than he is in the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings.
Yeah.
And for such a crucial, you know, it's a bit like we said about Rebus without the music, you know, or it's Holmes without the violin. Scudder without the AA meetings is a large part of what makes him fascinating is gone, you know. Yes. And this film really just pays lip service to that side of his character. They can't take it out entirely, or they don't feel they can take it out entirely. So they have it in, but it's really just a perfunctory inclusion of a thing that everyone knows is a major part of that character.
Yes.
So to hear him to know that they then say that they think his whole character revolves around it is just nonsense.
Yes.
That's just either misguided or total fabrication.
Yeah, because one of the other things that they said that again sort of made me laugh, having watched the film, was one producer mentions that regarding Scudder, that there's no Hollywood construction to Scudder. And literary, book Scudder, sure, I can kind of go with that. But this version of Scudder, I mean, the film opens up with the most cliche thing possible.
Yeah.
Like, a couple of cops. Him and his buddy cop fighting, arguing in a car. He, drunkenly stumbles into a diner or bar place. Has a coffee with 2 shots, and then there's a big giant action shootout scene where he just violently goes very taken and violently murders some people while kind of drunk while on the job,
in a bad wig.
And oh my god, the de-aged wig and beard. What the F?
And what annoys me about that is one of the biggest cliches, isn't it? We'll show how far he's come by having him shave off a beard. Yes. And have his hair cut. Come on.
Yes, yes. So, to say there's no Hollywood construction to Scudder, I'm sorry, but this film begins with Hollywood construction.
Well, they've cast Liam Neeson, for heaven's sake.
I mean, there is also that. So there is also that.
This is as Hollywood as you get, this film. This is Hollywood in a bottle, really.
Yes. This is cliche Hollywood in a bottle. This is everything about this movie, and this is what frustrates me is there's so much potential with some of these characters, like Marlowe or like Scudder, who can, if done right, are going to be able to do tremendous things on the big screen.
Yeah.
But for many, many years, the people producing those types of films just haven't been able to nail it for some reason, and I'm not quite sure what that reason is, but they just haven't been able to get it. And I think part of it is understanding character and understanding character journey. I mean, one of the other dumb things that they said in behind the scenes, there's so many things. One of they said that they in terms of Scudder, they felt that his sort of journey was that at the beginning of the movie, he's just surviving, but he's not living. And along the way throughout the film, while he's trying to save someone else, he saves himself. And I'm like, what?
God, come on. That's
bullshit.
That is not what he does at all. That's absolute nonsense. It's absolute nonsense.
Yeah.
And that's just sound bites, isn't it? That's not saying anything.
Yes.
That's just attempting to give a journey to a character and depth to a character that you don't then give him.
Yeah.
I mean, I would apply that to sort of someone like Harrison Ford in Witness, for example.
Oh God, yes. Yeah.
I'm going to say it, Luke. In Spades, he does that. All that whole film is his journey from tough cop to an understanding of human kindness and pacifism and all the rest of it. So, for a film like that, but this is no Witness.
No.
So this is giving praise to something that clearly doesn't deserve it.
I think that's what's missing in these sorts of adaptations that you get over the last several years. Why something like Blade Runner 2049 is a very broody, moody movie, but there's a human journey. There's a human journey going on.
Yeah.
And like Witness, there's a human journey happening, and you're invested in that. The hard-boiled cliches of the moody guy, that only works for about 5 minutes, and then you need to start digging beneath the surface of that character. And they never dig beneath the surface of Scudder in this movie. I think that's one of my biggest problems.
Yeah. And just touching on something you said about why these characters could work, but so often don't. I think part of that is that people think, taking Philip Marlowe as an example, as long as he's got a trench coat and a fedora and he's in a dirty office with a bottle of whiskey, we've nailed it. And that isn't what Marlowe... Those are trappings. Marlowe's deeper than that. Marlowe's much more complex than that. And Scudder is not just, as I said earlier, a bloke who goes to AA meetings. There's more to him than that. That is a part of him. But just turning up to those meetings isn't enough. Just seeing him at those meetings isn't enough. You've got to understand why he's there. You've got to understand, and they don't explain why he's there. A couple of shots in a bar, and then killing somebody. The way he's set up in that initial scene, there's not enough of it. He hasn't got enough fibre for that to matter to him. It looks as if he does that every day, like Dirty Harry. It's not scratching the surface enough. It's barely scratching the surface of why these literary characters endure when film versions of them disappear after a couple of years, or as we said before, you don't know they've even been made.
Yes,
you know?
I mean, with Scudder, like every Scudder book, there is always something happening with him in the AA meetings. There's always someone that he connects with, and is not even necessarily involved with the overall case or story. But there's always something happening with him and the AA meetings. Always. Whether he's trying to help someone in that meeting, that becomes like a bit of a side quest while he's also doing his main adventure. And there's none of that. Now, one of the things that they tried to do, so you have Dan Stevens, who plays Kenny Christo, who is who's the drug kingpin, and then he's got a brother played by Boyd Holbrook, whose name is Peter Christo. Peter Christo he's a druggie, he's an alcoholic, and he also goes to these AA meetings. What I'm like 90% certain that isn't in the book. They mentioned somewhere along the way and then behind the scenes that they connected Kenny to the AA stuff to give to give Scudder more of a connection to it all, which I thought he doesn't need to have a connection to it all. Like, you don't need to do that, because ultimately there's so much going on in the book that, like, Peter Christo isn't that important anyway, and trying to shoehorn him in to make him a bit more connected to Scudder, just, I don't think they didn't accomplish what I think they wanted to accomplish.
Because all it needs it's a plot device, isn't it, to get him in front of Kenny, so that Kenny can hire him. That's all it is. So, Kenny's going to be a man who knows people. Kenny's going to be a man who has connections throughout the city. So he's going to be able to find Matt Scudder at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting pretty easily. So that connection with Peter being there as well makes no sense. He could have just sent Peter to that meeting to bring Scudder, which is all.
I'm pretty sure that's what
really
happens in the books. I'm pretty sure that's what happens in the books.
Well, I'd be willing to bet it does, because that's a simpler way of telling the story. Otherwise, you're hinting at a connection that then has no payoff and doesn't mean anything. Then it becomes like just sheer coincidence.
Yes.
And it's pointless.
So in addition, there's other things I want to talk about character-wise, but I want to mention this as well. We talked about this with many of our other episodes, but hard-boiled fiction into film noir, into neo-noir has like the good movies and books of that genre all have one thing in common, and that is style. Yeah. Right. So you look at a Philip Marlowe book, you look at a Robert E. Parker book, you look at a Sarah Paretsky book, you look at something like the film The Big Sleep, you look at The Big Heat, you look at all that. All of those films are they have similar recurring tropes, but they always stand out because they all have a unique style.
Yeah, and
that to me was one of the big things that was missing in A Walk Among the Tombstones. It was entirely without style. No style. I don't know what you felt, but like just the general cinematography, every shot was flat and dull.
Yeah, and in terms of direction, the same.
Yeah.
The same. There were no camera angles in this or there were no interesting shots that made you stand up. They were. It was like watching. In parts, it's like watching a stage play. It's two people sitting in a room. Now that can be captivating. I don't want anyone to think that I find that sort of thing boring. That can be captivating. You look at a film like 12 Angry Men, which is 12 men in a room talking. That is one of the most tense films of all time. But it's got to be well written. There's the point under discussion has got to be fascinating in itself and a hook in itself, and the acting's got to be great, for it to come alive. This was just like watching two, not bad actors, but just a dull situation, and it shouldn't have been, because they were talking about violence and murder.
Yes.
And things like, but there's no. I'm thinking particularly about the scene where he first meets Kenny, and they're sitting opposite each other, opposite a coffee table on two settees, and it was just, a shot on Dan Stevens, cut to a shot on Neeson, and vice versa. And the camera just switched between the two. There was nothing else going on. And that starts to then become very stale. And even in the action scenes, there was nothing going on. Apart from the cemetery climax, which is then cut with an AA meeting. That was dreadful. And so I found it, I agree, I found it was very flat is the word, because it is two people on a flat screen, and that screen is not coming alive.
You look at classic noir, like they there's a reason why they play with light and shadow. There's a reason why it makes things look more dynamic. There's a reason why they have Dutch angles and weird up views or down views or side views. Like, there's a reason for that, and that is to make this scene feel more dynamic, because two people sitting having a conversation isn't necessarily that interesting. It can be, and the dialogue should be cracking enough that it is interesting. And that's what happens when you read a book. You don't have these kind of shots when you're reading a book, but that dialogue is still interesting. Here you have the added effect of being able to do something dynamic visually, and they do nothing with it.
No.
I mean, like the opening credits. Let's talk about the opening credits. Those cheesy, horrific, Lifetime original movie opening credits. What the F was that about? But I mean, so for those of you who haven't seen this film and are listening to this review, spoilers, obviously, but it's a scene of the attack, the killers, abductors, rubbing their hands all over a woman's body who has been kidnapped, and we see her eye, she's got duct tape on her mouth, all that kind of stuff, but it's in like it's shot almost angelic. And that everything is very white. The
background is totally white, and it's shot it's shot to make you think that she's having sex.
Yes, and then you realize that she's not,
and you realize she's not.
And it's very slow and creepy, and it's meant to be slow and creepy, but it just came across as the vibe I got from it, because how the opening credits end. You have all this white, bright white stuff, and then at the end, it smash cuts to a black screen, and then says directed by Scott Frank.
Yeah.
It reeked of first year film school student stuff.
Yeah, it does.
Like, I got an idea. It's all going to be really bright and white, but then like you're going to find out there's actually she's actually being like murdered, and then we'll like smash cut to a black screen and it'll be like really visually like people get it. It's like, it just felt cheesy to me.
Yeah, cheesy and sleazy.
Yeah,
to me. It doesn't have any depth to it, really. It's purely the shock it intends to give you never arrives, because it's done so slowly, and it's. I'm sure that they will have said, we'll have the camera caressing her. That's what we'll do, because that's the feeling that you get. And as it caresses down her face, it reveals the duct tape across her lips. And then I think that is meant to make you go, but it doesn't. It makes you go, oh.
Yes.
It makes you think, well, this is a bit dull and lame.
Yes.
And I'm not too sure that it comes across as artistic as they think, because like I said, I think it comes across far more sleazy than it does anything else. That she's meant to, you can shoot the abduction and torture and murder of a woman and make it look as if she's in the throes of ecstasy is a grim message to start your film with, I think.
I think the other thing that the opening credits set up is that, because you mentioned as well, like everything looks staged like a stage play, which I actually wrote that in my notes, that every room looks staged. Every scene looks staged. And like the opening credits that are bright white and super clean, all of New York City, every room, every street, everywhere we go in this film, the look on, it's just the general like look of the camera, everything looks so clean. Even when Scudder goes to a couple of dirty apartments, they don't look dirty, they look staged dirty.
Carefully careless is the phrase that sprung to my mind, which is an old Robert Smith lyric. Because it's meant to be dirty, so we'll make it look dirty. But when flats are dirty and disorganized, it's organic, and it's not just a few clothes tossed over chairs and all the rest of it. it looks real when it's done properly, because some thought has gone into it. But there's a general attitude of that'll do in this film for me. You know that. Oh look, we'll throw some clothes around and we'll have some dirty pots in a sink or whatever it might be, and that'll do. Gives the impression of what we want, instead of really getting into down and no pun intended, but down and dirty, you know, and making it look as if it's a flat that is meant to be seedy, you know, because the groundsman in the park is a seedy character, but even he looks clean.
He does, he does. He looks fake dirty. It was very frustrating to me the whole time. I just thought, oh my gosh, like, you have this gritty, dramatic novel that you're adapting, and you're in New York City, where that's a visually dynamic city, and everything just, it looks like you could lick every floor and not ever get sick.
yeah. And there's no sense of Scudder being in danger at any point. You know, when you watch a proper in inverted commas film noir, they walk down those streets, and you think at any given time, in the best of them, any given time, somebody could come out of an alleyway and kick 7 shades out of him. But here he looks like just a tourist. You know, there's that awful bit where he's being followed, and he knows he's being followed. And I did laugh when he punches his hand through the glass panel of a door into a bloke's face. You know, but there's no threat there. There's no threat in that following sequence, because you know exactly who it is that's following him. Because you can guess, because it's all done in a very cliched way. It's all done in a very obvious way. Yeah, you know. Or spoilers. It's the cops in it that are following him, or you know. But you're meant to think it's the killers, and you think, oh, come on. Come on. The killers don't even know about him at this stage, so why would it be the killers?
Exactly. It makes no sense. Makes no sense. But also, like that other scene where he is followed into a building. He goes to a little corner shop and is asking about a woman who was, you know, taken and killed. And then they're like, oh, well, she lived in that place. Go over there. And then he goes and gets attacked by the same 2 guys who were in the corner shop. And you know, you think they're really going to beat him up, but they just throw a couple of punches, and then suddenly they become friends. Yeah, and then it becomes play for laughs. Because one of them is in love with the woman that Scudder's looking for. Yeah, and he hits him, doesn't he? He sort of gives him a playful Laurel and Hardy slap and says, "Thought he was going to marry her," and then they end up having a laugh together. It's just it's nuts. It's nuts. You compare that to Bogart's Marlowe getting beaten up in the alleyway, where they leave him there on the floor. That is tension. That is violence. That is danger in the dark streets of noir. You know, this is just the A-Team by comparison. Yes, yeah. Which Liam Neeson was in the remake of A-Team. that wasn't intended. But I was speaking a little bit more on Neeson and diving a bit more into your question of is he right for this role? I mean, I absolutely not. I think what annoys me as I was watching this, and in my notes, I'm writing things like, he is dull, he is lifeless, I am not interested in him, he has no charm, there is no charisma, and frankly, I feel like it's a phoned-in performance. I don't think that he's not acting. He's just sort of, you know, it's interesting because he in interviews, Neeson was like, "Oh, I'm really interested in these loner characters. Blah blah blah. You know, Scudder is exactly the kind of person that I'm really into because I'm into these Scandi bleak crime thrillers, and this was really up my street." I'm like, really? Because you look bored. Yeah. None of that comes across. Across. He does look bored, and he's. I think it seems that he's. Since Taken, he's just done the same thing over and over and over again in different circumstances. Yes, and there's no one of the and I couldn't. People, I've read reviews of this film where they say, "Oh, it's a much deeper performance than he gives in Taken." And I thought, is it? No, is it really? I don't think it is. I don't think it necessarily is. No, he's better in Taken because Taken knows what it is, and it does that unapologetically. Yeah, it doesn't try and be anything more than it is. I agree with that. This Taken to me says this is 80 minutes or 85 minutes, whatever it is, of absolute nonsense.
But you will know it's nonsense. We're not going to try and convince you otherwise. But you'll have a great time while you're watching it.
Yes,
and I'm fully on board with films that do that.
Definitely,
I am fully on board with films that just say we are going to entertain you for 85, 90 minutes of your life, and that's all we're going to do. I'd like to see more of those. The Fall Guy was one of those to me. A film like this, I want, because noir is such a complex thing, because noir thrillers are complex things. I expect more from this film than I get. That's my problem. This is almost like there's an old Peter Cushing quote about Sherlock Holmes that says, if you don't do the Sherlock Holmes stories the way they are written, you might as well call him Joe Brown and have him as something else. You might as well have called this bloke Joe Brown, and then we wouldn't be offended by the fact that it's Matt Scudder, or it's meant to be Matt Scudder. Because my sort of summary of this film, if I can do it now, is I think this is a fairly average but watchable action flick. But as a Scudder adaptation, it's pitiful.
Yes. Well, one of the producers of the movie, they were saying, obviously, in terms of casting Neeson, there was all this. He was just like the perfect bit of casting. We're so glad we got him. One was like, no one else can be Scudder. Liam Neeson is Scudder. And there's all that kind of rhetoric going on. You're like, shut up. But they also they go a bit further with that, and they say things about how they're like, oh, this, we definitely want, there's that sort of Liam Neeson action that you kind of come to expect from a Liam Neeson movie, but it also goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than that. One of the producers went on to say that this film was called smart in the way that Silence of the Lambs is smart.
Oh, come on.
I was like, hold on, sir.
You are in a far different league there.
Yes.
Far different league. Thing is, this film's got all the action you expect from a Liam Neeson film. Well, A, it shouldn't have, because it shouldn't be a Liam Neeson film. It should be a Matt Scudder film. And B, it hasn't anyway. There's nowhere near as much action in this as there is in Taken or Unknown or anything like that.
No,
it just isn't.
But that's why they did that opening. In my opinion, that's why they did the opening of the movie the way they did it. Because the opening of this movie is big Liam Neeson action sequence, here's a shootout, here's a car chase, here's some brutal Liam Neeson shooting stuff. Because he doesn't do that in the rest of the film.
No. Well, and they will say because he's learned from that mistake, so he doesn't do it anymore. But that is so cheap. That is such a cheap character arc. That I don't buy into it at all. I just think, why is this a completely different man?
Yes.
From the credits. What's happened?
So in the early 2000s, Harrison Ford was initially attached to a version of this film that would have been directed by someone else. I can see that.
I can see that. I think Ford would have played it like an older version of his character in Witness. He would have brought some of that same vulnerability and integrity to it. Because one thing Ford is good at when he's in a good film is vulnerability. He's one of those tough guys who is capable of being hurt. That's why he was so good as Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
In the original three. I'll just add that caveat. Because he's got that Gary Cooper quality. Harrison Ford. He's got that Gary Cooper quality of I'm the hero, but I'm not certain of what I'm doing. And I am not guaranteed that this. I'm not guaranteeing this will work, and I'm not guaranteed to survive it. But I think this is the right thing to do, and I will do it. Yeah. And I think that's what you need to have, not just for Scudder, but for a lot of private eye noir characters. It's the old Philip Marlowe thing of I needed a vacation, I needed life insurance, and all whatever else he says. But I had a hat, a gun, and a coat, and I put them on and went out. Because that's all the noir hero has got himself, and he's got to go and do what he's got to do, whether he comes back alive or not. And I think Ford would have done a better job of that, of getting that side of the character across. I think that would have been a much more interesting film to discuss.
I think so too. It's a shame that we didn't get that that film. Let's talk about the character of TJ, because my God, this film suffers from the cliche old man kid relationship. We saw it in VI with Starsky, and it sucked there.
Yeah,
and my
definitely.
God, does it suck here too?
I'm not a lover of this. I am not a lover of this, because I think to myself, if a middle-aged man struck up a conversation with a teenage lad in a library.
Well, let's set the scene. Let's set the scene.
Okay.
So,
all right, go on then.
For those who don't know the scene, because I found the whole scene just insulting, because I agree with where you're going with this.
Yeah, okay.
And Scudder is in the public library, and he's the old man, so he can't use the computer, so he's got to be looking at
computers. So he's on a microfiche.
Yes,
like an old microfiche.
You're like, God. And so behind him is the cool young kid who's on the computer on the internet. And the kid drops a piece of paper that has illustrations on there. And he's an artist. The kid's an artist. And the kid is in the book, by the way. And the kid is fine in the book. Like, he's fine in the book. But the librarian comes over, and she's like, TJ, the janitor said that you left the bathroom in quite a state. Like, you're like, what the hell? And you need to
for a start. This is a library.
It's just like, God. And then Scudder's like, turns around. He's like, the kid's with me. He'll clean it up later. I'm just, and then they just become friends.
Yeah. With absolutely no questions asked.
Yes.
Nothing.
What the F?
He buys him some food. He buys him some pancakes in the next scene, I think. And after that, TJ is following him around New York City badly.
Yes.
And there's no questioning that at all. There's no, what earth are you doing? There's no explanation as to why. I don't know how old TJ's meant to be, but 15, 16 or whatever. Why he would even care about a middle-aged man. He's living on the streets. Why is he not thinking about robbing him?
Yeah.
Now, maybe the book explains all that, and I'm sure it does. But the film doesn't, and the film should. And that's my problem. You can't rely. You cannot rely on the audience having read the book. So you're going to have to feed some things in to make these scenes make sense. And this whole relationship to me just does not make any sense at all.
No, I completely agree. And I was baffled by it. The other thing that was weird is like the kid is he's homeless, but he's like a vegan.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't put nothing bad in me. And then he goes and eats pancakes. I'm like, but you just said, like, surely pancakes are loaded with sugar and stuff. You're not going to eat a pancake, right? You're going to eat something healthy, because you just made a big deal about how soda companies put stuff in the soda to make kids like sperm count go dead.
Yeah. Sperm killing soda. What are you talking about?
Oh my God. I think one of the biggest mistakes this movie makes, there are many, but one of the biggest mistakes is changing the time, because the book was published in 1992. It should have been set in 1992, because I don't think it marries the story in its contemporary setting very well. And I think the TJ relationship is a big part of where that's being very clunkily handled.
And I don't understand the setting, I have to say, the time setting. Because I knew the book was from the early 90s.
I know why.
This is set in 1999, isn't it?
I know why.
Oh, do you? Because
the producers mentioned it.
Oh, right. Well, I'll tell you what my thought on that, and then you can explain why they did it.
Yeah.
Because it seemed to me that they've got the guts to set it in the 90s, but they haven't quite got the guts to set it in the early 90s, like the really early 90s. So we can go back in time, but not too far, was my override. Because what difference does it make? And then I thought, is it just to have all these awful jokes about the Millennium Bug that aren't funny? You're going to tell me that's what it is, aren't you?
Oh, you finished, and I'll tell you.
Well, it's just that. I thought there's either no reason for it at all, and it's just we don't do it. We don't go any further back in time than this. Or it purely is to make jokes about the Millennium Bug. And perhaps also, to be generous, to explain why Liam Neeson can't use a computer, because a man of that age at that time might not have been, because he wouldn't have been brought up on it. But it didn't make any sense to me. But you can fill me in now. You can tell me exactly why it does make perfect sense.
So they're one of their decisions to change it, and the reason they picked 1999. Part of it is the millennia coming up, and but one of the big reasons is that they were saying they are quoted as saying, I'm paraphrasing their quote, but they're saying something along the lines of, this is Rudy Giuliani's New York City. It's in the process of like finally being cleaned up after all these years of being down and dirty, blah 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 blah. And so and then at the end of the movie, you have this pan up shot and you see the Twin Towers in the skyline, and you know that bad things are coming again, and that's their explanation.
Wow. Well, people won't know this, but I've got my head in my hands. Is that really what their explanation was?
Well, in one of their explanations, they are talking about how in 1999 New York was it's pre 9/11. It was a hopeful New York. It was a clean New York. So it's a promising new world for New York City, but at the end you see the Twin Towers and you know that it's going to get bad again. You're like,
that is so. That is. I don't know what I find. Is it? It's either moronic. It's offensive, or it's cheap.
Both.
But let's go with moronic.
Yeah. Yes. And on the topic of moronic, the other thing that annoyed me about the TJ Scudder relationship is how many times does this movie need to hang a lantern on Spade and Marlowe? Oh, so you're like, TJ mentions it multiple times within a span of like 5 minutes, like the Spade Marlowe comparison to Scudder. And it's like, well, I've read all these books because I just sleep in the library all the time. I've read all the Spade and Marlowe books. Have you? Yeah.
Well, you don't sound as if you have.
Right?
Yeah. It's just cheap and it's lazy, and it's saying to the audience, we know what camp we're in here. We know where we've come from, what our roots are. And I want to say, no, you don't, because just name dropping Spade and Marlowe isn't enough.
No.
Gentlemen, it's not enough. You need to do more than that. You need to have a character that leaps off the screen that will make me think about those earlier characters without you name dropping them.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
As you get in Chinatown, you know where Jake Gittes' fictional roots lie, but he never once mentions them.
No,
and the reason he says he says lines like, I like my nose, I like breathing through it, and things like that, which are very Chandler-esque. And the way he dresses, the way he acts, it's all harking back to that earlier time. But never once does he have to name them, because you shouldn't have to name them. You shouldn't have to name them.
No, it's quite ridiculous. It's the way how forceful they push those names is quite embarrassing. I found it embarrassing, but that's not the only embarrassing scene with TJ though. Later in the movie, he finds a gun somewhere, and Scudder is walking down the street, hears someone coughing, assumes it's him, I guess, and goes down the street and sees that it's TJ coughing, and talks to him a little bit and sees a gun in TJ's bag. And then there is by far the creepiest, like weirdly erotic scene in the movie. More erotic than the ladies being murdered and viciously, brutally tortured in sexual ways. Scudder tells TJ to take the gun out, and I quote, he's like, caress it, rub it, feels good. Yes, now cock it.
Weird.
And you're like, I'm holding my head while I'm watching this. I'm like, why is this a scene that is happening in this movie? Why is this dialogue happening? Why? Especially when the film has already made a point of TJ saying something about how, white, because TJ's a little black kid. He's already made the point of saying how white men like to, touch him. Basically, he's implying that he's been, molested by white men. And then you have this weird scene from Scudder who's being like weirdly sexual about a gun that the kid is holding, and you're like, what the F is going on?
Yeah. And Scudder, who's meant to have turned his back on it all because of the chaos he caused and the carnage that he was responsible for in the first scene. So why, like you say, why do it? I mean, I know why to do, because the punchline is you got to be ready to be shot if you're going to carry one of those. But
yes,
the way the message might work, but the way of delivering the message is absolutely horrendous.
Yes,
because it doesn't make sense to either character. Because TJ is sold as a streetwise kid. So if a middle-aged man started talking to him like that, he would say, "What are you? No chance. I'm right out of here." There'd be a knee to the groin, and he'd leg it and never see him again. It's movie. It's people talking in movie talk for the sake of a movie plot device. Yeah, and it's cheap. It's nasty, and it's fake. The whole thing is fake. I don't believe in any of this. No. Despite the fact that I watched it and all the way through and thought, well, it's is what it is. What it is fake.
Yes. Yeah. The other thing that also, there was so many things about this movie that annoys me, but I also get the impression that this version of Scudder, he's not intelligent. I don't find him smart. And the perfect scene is when he meets the guy. He meets Lugan. Is it Lugan or it's Lugan? I think it's Lugan in the graveyard, who is connected to the murderers. He was the driver for one of their abductions, and he fled and wanted nothing to do with it. But he's too afraid to come forward. Anyway, Scudder finds him, connects the dots, blah blah blah, and he finds Lugan's little. He doesn't live in. He lives on the roof of a block of flats in, I don't know, some sort of like janitor office thing, and he finds some dirty photos. Anyway, there's some back and forth, and Lugan eventually admits all of his connections to these killers, and Scudder's like, well, I'm going to take you into the police now, and he's like, okay, but can I feed my birds first? And you're just like, okay, he's going to jump off the roof.
Yeah.
And he does. He feeds the birds, gives him the name of one of the guys, and then jumps on. But what annoyed me the most about it is Scudder's like, yeah, sure, go feed your birds. I'm just going to turn my back on you and not look and see what you're doing.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
yeah,
what
right.
are you effing doing?
What are you doing? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is a lead. This man's a detective.
Yeah.
And this is a lead, right?
Yeah.
This man has vital information, which, having made the decision he's going to jump off the roof, he just gives Scudder. He doesn't sort of say to Scudder, I'm not telling you anything, and then jumps off the roof. He has to give Scudder the important information to get him onto the next step of the investigation, which is to give him the name of one of the killers. He does pose the question, without that bloke, if that bloke had just said, I'm not telling you anything, and jumped off the roof, what would Scudder do? Where would he go?
No.
That end of movie, really.
Yeah.
So that scene is, again, stupid and dumb.
Yes. Yeah, and so you can have that scene, and that scene can work, but the way that scene plays out just feels like negligence.
Yeah, it does. And again, the shock of him jumping off the roof doesn't come.
No,
because the minute you see him standing on, ostensibly feeding the pigeons in his cage.
Yes.
Well, why is he doing it from the side that overlooks the street? Why is he not doing it from the safety of the roof?
Yes.
Oh, because he's going to jump off.
He's put the cage between him and Scudder, and he's over there by the edge. It's like you know what's coming.
You know what's coming. Yeah, you know what's coming.
Sloppy. This movie's so sloppy. Speaking of sloppy, it's all bouncing to the next point. There is a moment in this movie where it I think kind of sums up the lack of attention that this movie I think has, and it's sort of awareness of the audience. And there's a scene where there's a scene where Scudder goes to an AA meeting, and Peter is there, Peter Christo, the brother of the drug kingpin.
Yeah.
And they have a little bit of a conversation, and then they're walking down the street. And as they're walking down the street, Scudder is just very distracted by everything else. He's distracted because he's seeing a van. He's distracted because he's thinking. And in the background, Peter is just babbling on. He's babbling. And I am not taking in, as a viewer, I'm taking in nothing that Peter is saying. And then Scudder stops, picks up a telephone, public telephone, goes to make a call, and then sort of looks at Peter, and Peter's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, right. See you later."
Yeah.
And you're like, what was the point of any of that?
Yeah.
You're walking down the street, you're utterly ignoring him. He's not offering anything of use, clearly, other than just to be a gnat in your ear in this scene. And I'm like, this is where the film's problem overall, is it's so unfocused that there's it's a clean looking film, but it's so noisy. Like there's a lot of stuff happening, and you don't know where to focus because the film has a massive focus problem.
Yeah, it has. And I agree about that scene. That again, it's in terms of story, the scene is fine in that he sees the van, realizes there's something not right about the phone number or the company or whatever it is, and phones the operator. Therefore, learns that it's bogus. That's a clue. That's a good clue, and it's a good way of finding out that information. But the window dressing around it is dreadful because you can take Peter out of that scene, and I think the point of the babbling in the background and all that is to show that Scudder is now focused on something, and he's alert to this potential clue, and that's what he's focusing on now. And what Peter's saying is unimportant. Well, you can do that just by having him look at the number, double take it a few times, and have a few reactions to it without Peter in the background. You don't need Peter in the background.
Yeah, but and
it goes back to the fact you don't need Peter at AA anyway. You don't need.
But that's the thing. He actually goes to the AA meeting to find Peter.
Yeah.
So it's like, I thought you went to find him, and now you're ignoring him, and I don't understand why you're ignoring him.
Yeah.
God damn it, movie.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's all to get the fact that this phone number and company are bogus. And so he then deduces that they're using the van with different company names and phone numbers. And that's why no one sees the same van twice, sort of thing. But so going to the AA meeting to find Peter and having Peter in that scene is meaningless.
Yes.
It's meaningless. It just doesn't make any sense.
Isn't the van the FBI?
Is it?
Yeah, the van is the FBI. It's not he doesn't even work out the van situation, which irritates me because he does in the book.
Is it the FBI? Well, I did say at the beginning that I didn't remember much after the rock.
Yes, because not long after that, it's right around that he gets followed in, punches the guy, and it's the FBI.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
So he doesn't even deduce that that's what they're doing. And to piggyback onto that with the van problem, I was flabbergasted when the movie gave away the van gag at the very beginning. So at the very beginning, basically what's happening with the bad guys, they are going around abducting women off the streets and then murdering them and cutting them into pieces and leaving their body parts in places. And what they're doing is they're always in a van, but every time they go out, they've repainted the van and put a new business name on it, all that sort of stuff. Which is why the gag when he's talking to Kenny is meant to be like, "Oh, it could be the killers," but it's the FBI. And at no point does Scudder ever realize that that's kind of what they were doing. Or I don't remember the movie making a clear point of him deducing them doing that.
Because one of the witnesses is describing the van, if I remember rightly.
Yeah. They all say it was a different van every time, and you're like, okay, so he's got to work it out. But the film is showing you the bad guys changing the van every time. Yeah, because you're like, why are you doing that, movie? Yeah,
those witness testimonies are voiceover to the visual image of them spray painting the van.
Yes.
Yeah, and that does give away a trick very early on.
Yes.
That really Scudder should work out. You're absolutely right about that. He's a detective, for God's sake. He should be working this stuff out. He should have a moment of... I mean, it would have been, again, this is off the top of your head, but when he realizes that the van the FBI is in has a fake name on it, that would be something. That would then, to a fictional detective, should have the moment of inspiration where he thinks, well, if the FBI can do it, why can't the killers do it? Maybe that's why the vans are all different. And if it had been shot, and then we see them spray painting the van, if it had been shot in that sequence, Scudder would have had a bit more agency.
Yes.
And there would have been more mystery in the film. But as it is, this plays out like an episode of Columbo because we know everything straight away.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. It's the other thing is like there's a really cool bit in the book in which Scudder is trying to pinpoint the location of these killers and trying to like do so, and back this is in the 90s. So he's basically he has to do it via the payphones. And he has to get some people who can get information from where payphones are and how they work and how to track and how to locate and how to all that kind of stuff. And so he goes the book goes out of his way to do a really cool subplot with him trying to locate the killers via the payphones that they've been using. And again, that was something to me that felt all of those mystery bits, the disguised van, the using the payphones to locate the people, like all of that stuff is just gone from this movie. Yeah. All the things that I found really interesting and fun in the book are not here because they're not.
Which is why this is a thriller rather than a detective story.
Yeah.
There's no detection. There was very little detection in this. I do quite like the bits where we see him putting the shoe work, the shoe leather working, and we see him traipsing around New York City interviewing the witnesses.
Yeah,
I like that, but that only takes you so far. You've got to have a moment where the fictional detective has a eureka moment. That's got to come. It doesn't always have to be a Hercule Poirot one of the fact that the door wasn't open at 9:30 at night is vital, or whatever it might be. The dog that did nothing in the nighttime. To use a Holmes one. It doesn't have to be one of those, because Marlowe doesn't often have those. Spade doesn't have those. But there's got to be something where the detective realizes what's going on in a detective story. And if you take all that away, then you're left with just a thriller.
Yes. Yeah.
And these are detective stories. These are crime novels with detection elements in, because he's a PI.
Yes.
So all the time we're losing strands and foundations from the originals and moving further and further into just stock Hollywood territory. That's my view of this.
Yes.
Whole analysis in this film.
So the producers of this film, so that the two bad guys, their names are Ray and Albert. One of the producers, Stacey Sher, said that they were the most terrifying screen villains that she had read in a long time. Now, the booked version of the villains are terrifying.
Yeah.
And they in the documentary they kind of talk about how like, they're the killer among us, the killer among us. And this is where one of the other producers mentions that Tobin Armbrust mentions that A Walk Among the Tombstones is smart like Silence of the Lambs is smart, and goes on to say that the way Scott shot it was getting into the killer's heads. Because we're looking at them checking their stocks. We're watching them eat breakfast together. We're watching them kill together. And I'm like, at no point in this film do I ever feel like I am remotely in their heads. You are pausing the movie to show us scenes of them in the way that Manhunter pauses the movie to let us hang out with the killer in that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, your version of how the way you are portraying what you think this film is portraying is nuts to me, because this is a thing. Everything is like you have to be in the know to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like none of that is conveyed on screen.
No, none of it is. And you compare, how many years before this was Silence of the Lambs? 22 years, was it?
It was like 20 some odd years.
So, we've come a long way, but gone backwards in those 22 years. Because for someone to say you're getting inside the killer's heads in this is madness, because you are not. You are seeing them eat breakfast, but that's not telling me anything about them. And if you take the scenes that they're obviously patting their own backs about, in terms of what you see from the killer's point of view, and you compare them to what you see from Buffalo Bill's point of view, including the kidnapping of Catherine Martin, including the famous or infamous scene where he's got his legs together, and the makeup scene and all that, and even the scene where she's in that pit, that's getting inside his head. All that is getting inside his head and doing it extremely well. That is a far cry from eating breakfast together.
Oh, God, yeah.
There is absolutely no comparison. These people are deluded. If they think this film is anywhere near Silence of the Lambs. These films are these people are deluded, aren't they?
It's some interesting hot takes from the producers of the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, I get you're not going to trash your film. I get that, but I do think, maybe hold off saying certain things until the movie's out.
I think you can. Yeah, they're not going to trash the movie, no, but they should praise the movie for what it does, and that is give you a almost brainless action flick.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, don't try and make it into something it isn't. Like we were saying before, nothing wrong with Taken and the way Taken was marketed and sold. Nothing wrong at all with that. And this has got more in common with Taken than it has with Silence of the Lambs in terms of what they're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
But this isn't as good as Taken because it's striving to be something better, but is failing badly because it's not being dealt with properly. That's and that's taking too much away from Block, in my view. It takes too much away from Block. I've not read this particular book, but I've read enough of Block's other work to know what a Block adaptation should be, or what I think it should be, and in this, it isn't this.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that really baffled me about the killers of this movie is there's a scene where, I mean, I literally found them both very, very boring, very dull. Everyone in this movie is boring and dull and or overacting. It just irritates me. Anyway, but the bad guys, there's this moment in the movie where the bad guys are looking for their next prey, and they pick the daughter of some Russian crime boss. And the scene that plays out it's such a bizarre scene that does not fit the tone of this movie. So they're looking at this house, they're thinking they're going to, knock off one of the girls who lives, and they think, oh, they've realized it's a nurse, so they're not going to do that. While they're waiting or about to drive away, they then see a young girl, like 12, 13, 14, something like that, come walking out of the house with her dad. And then everything happens in slow motion. Then this pop song starts to play.
Yeah.
While the two bad guys are oogling her as if she's like the, in a kind of like lustful way. And it's a scene that feels like you would have seen in something like a David Fincher film, like in like Fight Club or something, but doesn't in any way, shape, or form fit the tone of this movie.
No.
At all. Like
no,
it's a bit like, maybe it's a bit like Manhunter again, where like, the what's the killer's name in Manhunter? I can't remember.
Tooth Fairy.
It's a bit like when the Tooth Fairy is having these sort of weird visions of what he's seeing that aren't really there, or like the glowingness of something. It's almost like the killers are having that kind of moment, and that's why this comedic song is playing. But it feels comedic. I'm like, these guys, this shouldn't feel comedic because they're going to abduct that girl and potentially murder her.
Yeah.
What are you doing, movie? Like, also,
it's a very uncomfortable scene. That it's a very uncomfortable scene. It could be terrifying, but it is shot like it reminded me of the Friends episode where Denise Richards is always taking her hair down.
Yes.
And that music comes in. It's like that.
Oh my gosh, yes. It is exactly like that. It's exactly like that.
And it shouldn't be, because the girl's age, for one thing. It should be, you should think these people are sick. You shouldn't be laughing at them. You shouldn't be laughing at them. And I just want to talk very, very quickly about, and I can't remember which one it is. I think it's Ray. It's Ray, who is, let's say, the leader of the two.
David Harbour, played by David Harbour. Yeah.
All those phone calls he makes,
so boring.
That are meant to imply that he has no conscience, I think, and that are meant to imply that he's, he said, well, he cut the price, so we cut her, and all that business. It comes across as just leaden and really dull and ridiculous. And they're not frightening, these two. They're not frightening. They do frightening things, but they are not frightening. And they are not. And I wonder if that, again, going back to the Silence of the Lambs, if those phone calls are meant to be like the ones that Lecter has, where he's having an old friend for dinner and all that, and he's phoning Clarice all the time. If they are, it fails. It fails because they're nothing like it. And I know what sort of character he's meant to be and what they're trying to achieve with his dialogue and his performance, but it doesn't come off at all. It comes off like an amateur dramatics production. And pantomime.
Yeah.
They're not scary. They're not scary. The phone call between Ray and Scudder, where Scudder's not backing down, and he's saying, no, you don't get your money unless we know they're alive. And what's the name of the dog and the dog before it and all that business? That should be tense. Yes. That should be your antagonist and your protagonist butting heads for essentially the first time. And it should be setting up the fact that Scudder's going to take no rubbish from these people, and that they need to be as frightened of him as they think he is of them. And it doesn't do any of that.
No.
And again, to hark back to Taken, it's nowhere near powerful as the famous phone call in Taken.
Oh my God, absolutely.
Not a chance.
And you can kind of almost see the producer's head thinking, oh my God, Liam Neeson does that phone call in Taken. We can kind of do that here as well. That's why he's perfect for this role. He has to talk meanly to a person over the phone.
Yeah. He's perfect for his role because he can talk on a phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, I don't know about you, but by the time we get to, in the book, I'm loving all this stuff. By the time we get to the Russian girl being kidnapped, and I want the movie to be over. I'm like, how is there another abduction? How we got to go through all this again? Just end. I don't care about the Russians in this. I don't care about them. They're boring, lifeless characters that just sort of are there to serve.
Well, they're all cliched as well, aren't they? He's there in his sliders and socks and gym wear because that's what Russian mafia dress like, and but you've seen that in some 80s comedies, so that's what people think they dress like,
Yes.
It's that sort of feel. I didn't feel like that at this stage, but I did want the movie to be over in the cemetery. I wanted that to be the end.
Oh yes, that too.
I didn't need the showdown in the house. I didn't need Scudder. Phone of all the people he could have possibly phoned, he phones TJ to go and get his gun and stuff from his flat, and then says, "Give it Peter and stay where you are," as if TJ's going to do that nonsense.
Yeah, the whole ending felt of that, we have this kid, we got to get the kid into trouble. Which, again, there's elements of this that happen in the book, and that's fine. But because TJ's not a real character in this movie, I'm just everything is so exhausting. And it's a boring and exhausting movie, and in my opinion, a horrible adaptation of what I think is one of the best noir books ever written. I have such high praise for Walk Among the Tombstones, the book, that it's like if we never got Humphrey Bogart's The Big Sleep. And the first Big Sleep adaptation we got was the Robert Mitchum adaptation, set in London, that just screws the book over. And that's how I feel with this. I'm like, this has taken a terrific book and has taken it from behind and ruined it.
Robert Mitchum's Big Sleep is a low. That really is a low point.
It is, and I feel like I think this is a modern equivalent of that.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go and buy the book and read the book, and then do a follow up, because I feel that if I'd read the book, I would feel as you do. And I've seen enough adaptations of crime novels I've loved and admired, absolutely eviscerated by Hollywood studios. And not just crime novels. I've seen a lot of adaptations of various books that have been absolutely ripped to pieces.
Yeah.
By studios and scripts and filmmakers, and I guess that this would be one of them if I, had read it. Certainly, I asked the question of you, and I'll answer it now of me. This is not what Matt Scudder looks like and acts like to me in the books that I've read. He's a million miles apart from it. So far removed from the Scudder that I knew. In the books I'd read, and I read them quite a long time ago now. I have to say, I should revisit them really. But Liam Neeson is not him any more than Liam Neeson is Philip Marlowe. This is not the Scudder of my memory and my knowledge of the books, and it's a shame because of all. He's one of those fictional detectives who deserves a good screen treatment.
Yes, I totally agree.
There's a lot to be said for Matt Scudder. There's a lot of intrigue in those books, and a lot of character depth.
It's a shame because I feel like when it comes to Lawrence Block adaptations, he's he's not really had the best of adaptations. And one film I'm very much looking forward to covering one day is one of Bloch's other famous characters is the Bernie Rodenbar stories. He's a criminal, but he owns a bookstore, but he also is he's a thief. He's a kind of like a To Catch a Thief guy. Burglar. Yeah. Great books. They did an adaptation of Bernie in 1987, where Bernie was played by Whoopi Goldberg. Our good friend Ian Rankin suggested we watch this at some point, so we will watch it.
I do remember that, yeah.
We will talk about this. It is a shame in terms of being a fan of these books that this is what happens to Walk Among the Tombstones. I think on that note, we should do the ratings.
We'll do the ratings.
Okay, we rate every film out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. My rating for A Walk Among the Tombstones, I'm giving it to 2 Falcons, and that's being generous.
I was expecting far worse. I did wonder if we were going to get any Falcons at all from you on this particular film, but
I'm being generous. I'll give it 2. I'll give it 2 because I'll just be nice and give it 2.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be slightly more generous because I didn't hate it as much as you, but I stress that is because it's not a book I've read. I stopped reading the Scudder novels before I got to this one, which I will rectify. But I'm gonna give it a 3. But it certainly deserves no more than that. There's no possibility of this getting higher than that. It held my interest more than a 2.5 film did, but only just. At
one point in the film, I had to there's a function on my 4K player where I can fast forward it, and it plays at like 1.5 speed. So it speeds up, but you can hear people. Everyone's still, you hear all the talk, you hear everything. It doesn't and so I was by about an hour in, I was like, I got to get through this faster. I'm so bored, and I finished the last half at 1.5 speed because I
didn't feel like that. I have to say, I didn't feel like that. But
yeah,
there's a lot wrong with this film, and clearly as an adaptation, it fails. Would I watch it again? Not for a long time, I don't think. If ever.
I don't think I'll ever watch it again. I think this is one of those movies, and I'm not saying it to be like hyperbolic. I mean, like, this is one of those films that is not important. It's in my opinion, it's not worth your time. I can't say we like to recommend movies. I can't recommend this one. Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.